COVID-19 death toll in France increases sixfold, the government declaring a public health emergency, also increasing fines for leaving home without a valid reason. The Tokyo Games are in doubt as Canada becomes the first team to pull out over the coronavirus. The International Olympic Committee has given itself a deadline of 4 weeks to make a final decision. Also coming up this hour on France 24, chloroquine, a cure for COVID-19 or a poison? We'll be speaking to a professor of infectious and tropical diseases later in the program about a drug that's been around since the 1940s, which can be toxic in high doses. Do stay tuned. Well, those are our top stories here on France 24. I'm Sanam Chantier. Thank you for watching France 24. Now we start here in France, where the Parliament on Sunday declared a health emergency to counter the spread of COVID-19. The legislation gives the government greater powers to fight the pandemic, which include restricting the freedom of movement and services over a period of 2 months. Meanwhile, the country is ramping up the number of tests available for people who think they have the virus. James Wilson brings us up to speed.
More and more people in France are desperate to be tested for coronavirus, and medical staff are trying to get it done as quickly as possible. Now would-be patients don't even have to leave their car for swabbing. This doctor has had a suspicious cough for a few days now, but regardless, she's more concerned about the well-being of her own patients.
J'ai beaucoup de patients fragiles et puis même s'ils ne sont pas fragiles, ils peuvent être vecteurs de la maladie et le transmettre à des personnes fragiles.
The World Health Organization has come out in favour of mass screenings as a way to reduce the risk of vulnerable people coming into contact with asymptomatic carriers. But so far in France, tests are reserved for at-risk groups, including the elderly and medical staff. One of the biggest reasons for the rapid spread of the disease is that many people with little or no symptoms are carrying it, and for the French government, this means their strategy to deal with the pandemic will have to change after the country's lockdown comes to an end.
C'est l'enjeu. Au moment où nous levons le confinement, au moment où nous permettons à chacune et chacun de reprendre le cours normal de sa vie, nous devrons pouvoir vérifier que les personnes pour lesquelles il y avait un doute présentaient ou non la maladie. Et quand je dis multiplier, cela veut dire multiplier, pas juste augmenter. Sans attendre, nous travaillons avec l'ensemble des industriels en France comme à l'étranger pour augmenter ces capacités de test dans les plus brefs délais.
At the moment, France simply does not have enough tests to carry out mass screenings, and the experience of Asian countries, such as Taiwan and South Korea, suggests it is an effective measure.
Over to Italy, where the death toll from the coronavirus continues its relentless rise. The country announced 651 dead in 24 hours alone. The Italian government has now made a direct appeal to the Defense Secretary Marcus Speer for US military aid in combating the disease. Now, other countries, including Russia and Cuba, have started sending aid to the country. Here's France 24's Camille Nedelac with that story.
From Russia with love. That's the message of these trucks carrying medical equipment bound for Rome.
По указанию министра обороны Российской Федерации в кратчайшие сроки была создана группировка сил и средств и сформирована оперативная группа для оказания помощи Итальянской Республике в борьбе с коронавирусной инфекцией.
Russia sent mobile disinfection units capable of sanitizing vehicles, buildings and public spaces, as well as medical equipment such as test kits to the worst-hit areas of Italy. 8 medical brigades, including virologists with first-hand experience of fighting African swine fever and Ebola, also made the trip. Meanwhile, in Milan, 36 Cuban doctors, 15 nurses and a logistics expert arrived to lend their expertise. Cuban doctors have already helped fight the virus in a number of other countries, including Venezuela and Nicaragua. In Havana on Saturday, they were at a swearing-in ceremony where they mentally prepared for the challenges ahead.
Como médico me siento como cuando fui al ébola, muy inspirado, muy emocionado por dar algo de la medicina cubana al mundo, a aquellas personas que tanto lo necesitan.
China has also sent medical supplies, as Italy bears the brunt of the current outbreak of coronavirus, losing over 1,000 patients in a single weekend.
Now over to Spain, where plans have been announced to extend the country's state of emergency for another 15 days. This is the number of COVID-19 deaths saw. The bill would mean that people would be housebound until April the 11th. Now, another measure announced by the Spanish government is that 9 hotels are to be converted into clinics to take care of less serious cases. Meanwhile, reports have been emerging that the country's deputy prime minister, that's Carmen Calvo, was hospitalized on Sunday with respiratory infection and is still being tested for COVID-19. Turning our attention to the US, where political disagreements in Washington are continuing to stall economic relief this Monday. Republicans and Democrats are locking horns over the makeup of the COVID-19 stimulus package. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, finally acknowledging the gravity of the situation, declared a war against the disease while ordering thousands of emergency hospital beds to be set up at coronavirus hotspots. Let's take a listen to the US president speaking earlier.
In addition to large quantities of supplies, I've also directed FEMA to supply the following: 4 large federal medical stations with 1,000 beds for New York, 8 large federal medical stations with 2,000 beds for California, and 3 large federal medical stations and 4 small federal medical stations with 1,000 beds for the state of Washington.
Donald Trump there speaking. Now, earlier, the US president praised an anti-malaria drug as a treatment for the novel coronavirus. However, scientists agree that only more trials would determine if chloroquine really works and is safe. This amid an international race to develop effective medication for COVID-19. Now, Christian Perron, professor of infectious and tropical diseases, joins us by phone for more on this. Thank you so much for being with us, Professor. Is it not too premature to jump the gun here, especially given that in some parts of the world, a strain of chloroquine is an off-the-shelf drug, but at the same time, it can be very toxic?
No, in fact, this drug is a well-tolerated, very well good profile of tolerance. It is prescribed for decades, and millions of people took it during for long times. And it's currently prescribed for lupus and some chronic diseases. So we know perfectly this drug. It has some side effects, but if you are cautious, and it's really not a problem, especially for treatments which are planned for a duration of 10 days, something like that. So they are very short treatments.
So there are several issues that are a little bit worrying here. We have reports here that researchers have only looked at 36 patients and 26 actually received the hydrochloroquine in the study. So this is a tiny sample size. In addition to that, people seem to be self-prescribing across the world. In Nigeria, many cases are being poisoned.
What want some of the physicians who support this treatment is to give it in hospitals for rather severe patients under medical control without any risk. And that was done in preliminary studies, which one was done in Marseille by Professor Raoult. He's expecting to publish a new study in a few days. Of course, these data are very preliminary because it was the beginning. We are in a situation of war against the virus, so they didn't have time to do a huge study about 500 patients versus a placebo. It's just a concept of a proof of concept, and now I think this drug is safe. We know it. We know it is given for a long time, and it should be given in patients. The problem is a shortage in many countries, and I think that the manufacturers should now make it on a large scale to provide millions of treatments in our hospital under medical supervision, it's important.
So, Professor, you are very much an advocate of chloroquine if it's given under supervision, despite the cases of poisoning that we've seen. Are there also concerns, if you can very briefly tell us, that there will be a shortage of the drug now, with people maybe even hoarding? Because we have seen that with, let's say, masks and gloves, for example.
Yes, there's a shortage of everything, unfortunately. I hope that our authorities are taking now all the good decisions to change the situation. And but now I see a hesitation among our deciders, because some experts say, no, we should wait for randomized study versus placebo to see if hydroxychloroquine is effective. We know it's effective from preliminary results in China, from preliminary results from Marseille. I agree with further good scientific studies to prove that in the future. But now our patients may die in a few days, and they need the drug. It's the only drug available today which can work.
Professor Christian Perron there, thank you so much for speaking to us here on France 24 about the effectiveness of chloroquine.
Thank you.
Now, the International Olympic Committee is finally considering a postponement of the Games and has given itself a deadline of 4 weeks to make a decision. This, as various countries have stepped up pressure to warn that they won't send their athletes to Tokyo 2020, among them the US, Canada, France and Spain. Let's take a listen.
We are well aware of the emergencies, particularly in the United States and Europe, and also of the many opinions that we have received. I would like to say that we are not so stupid as to announce that we are going to continue as planned, despite the concerns.
Well, that's it from me and the team at this hour. Do stay tuned to France 24.